Welcome to another edition of the Solutions 360 podcast ClearTalk. Today, I'm happy to be joined by Nate Gardner and Tofiq Indawala. How are you guys doing today?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Great. Thanks for having us, Jet. Mac.
So, with all of the new things going on, we thought we would dedicate an episode to talk about an upcoming launch, Q360 Payments. So, I figured you two, being very involved in the process of launching it, creating it, the ideology behind it, we'd start with an interview style question so we can get all this information out in a way that I think will be meaningful. So I'll throw the first question to you, Tofiq. If you could walk me through what payment collection looks like in a typical integration company before Q360 and what that might look like post Q360 payments launch.
Sure. Thanks, Mac. When we talk about payments, this is related to getting paid for invoices that we issue to customers, rather it be on the project side or service, recurring billing, RMR type of billing. And the challenge is how do we get paid quickly, right? There's a traditional way of paying, which is, checks, ACH. There are different methods of payment, but how can we shorten that gap of collection, essentially? So the way we normally do it is the invoice goes out and somehow somebody puts it in their AP and then the check gets cut out at certain interval and gets paid. So that's a traditional flow. And the way the customers normally deal with this is they'll send a link outside for collection payments and so on. So that's kind of what we generally talk about when we say payments and collection is how do invoices get paid?
Great. Well, when you talk to customers, Nate, I'll throw this question to you. Taking what Tofiq just said, what were some of the frustrations that led us to investigate launching something like Q360 payments?
Yeah, as we've been going through our accounting module in particular, we've been looking for areas where we can streamline the process and particularly try to streamline the month-end close process. And what we found was pretty much everyone we talked to had a pretty meaningful reconciliation program where they were working with one or two different payment processors, usually one for their credit cards and a different one for their wires. And then they had to go manually reconcile at the end of each month all of the payments that were made, make sure they tied to all the invoices and knew which invoices the payments actually tied to, and then made general letter entries in the platform. And so when we looked at how could we compress that month-end close cycle, this was definitely an opportunity to, in some cases, take 2 or 3 days out of the process.
All right, so why don't we back up a little bit before we get into the details? Tofiq, what are we actually talking about here? We can say Q360 payments all day long, but when a customer gets an invoice post implementation of this new software, what does it look like moving forward?
Well, as soon as they sign up for Q360 and or Q360 payments, if they're an existing customer, what that means is that they're able to streamline the invoicing and collection process. So when they're sending out an invoice, for example, they would have a link within the invoice, or they can manually send it, or a part of the email that gets sent to the customer with the invoice. So that will go through a payment page, which allows the end user, the cardholder, to process the payment on that invoice. So it really shortens the gap, like Nate was referring to, the reconciliation gap and the payment collection gap, which improves the overall cash flow position.
Excellent. So going back to a conversation we had the other day, Nate, you mentioned directly embedded a few times. Could you describe what that means in practice and how that differs from existing solutions out there?
Yeah, I think what it means in practice is that you can complete the entire collections workflow inside of the Q360 application without having to go back and forth between multiple different apps. And as I mentioned before, it was often 3 or 4 different parties that were involved in the collection process, which now can be done without leaving the Q360 app from initiating the invoice all the way through collecting the payment and making journal entries around it.
Yeah. So what that actually, just to add to that, normally what ends up happening is that you'll have a customer that has a link on their website, on their corporate website to say pay now. and the end cardholder will type in the invoice number and then the amount they're paying, and then somebody will get triggered in the AR team to say somebody made a payment, and they have to do the manual work. Sometimes what ends up happening is that you have a customer that's paying multiple invoices, let's say five invoices for $500, but they might only pay $450. We don't know what that is. So they have to manually figure out which invoices that they paid, or they have to go back into their accounting software and manually mark those invoices paid. So all of this requires quite a bit of manual effort, reconciliation of which invoices are still outstanding, which ones actually got paid, or they might use a third party where they're actually extracting all the outstanding AR and uploading it somewhere else, and then coming back into Q360 or accounting software. So what we're trying to do when we talk about embedded, we're trying to close that entire loop and gap and make it very user-friendly and streamline the entire process.
All right, so Tofiq, you have customer portal payments. You have these payment links on invoices. Can you walk us through how those two channels work and who tends to use which?
Yeah, it's available to any customer essentially. So the difference is that when you're sending out an invoice link, these are one-off invoices that you might be sending to customers for RMR billings or so on, where the customer can simply click on the link and pay that invoice. With the customer portal, what that allows the customer to do is see all of their outstanding invoices. So if you have a corporate customer or national account, where you might give them access to a customer portal where they're able to see a lot of other things, but amongst that is their outstanding AR, outstanding invoices. So they can go ahead and save their credit card in there for payment card, and they can take a look at all their invoices and pay multiple invoices in one swoop of processing that credit card. And all of those invoices get reconciled automatically in the system.
So let's say everybody loves what you're saying and they're interested. Um, Nate, why don't we move on to what this looks like to roll out? Let's say an integrator is listening right now and is eager to sign up. What does that process actually look like from day one?
Yeah, this process is actually really simple. So there's just a couple of steps. If they're customers, you'd reach out to your customer success manager or in implementation. The implementation team knows how to run this process, and certainly can also talk with sales if you're evaluating Q360. But the first thing we would do is go through a quick onboarding process where you provide a little bit of information about the business, its tax ID, a few other fields, much of which, if you're a customer, we already have in the system and can streamline that process. And then you'll go through what's called underwriting, where our partner bank will assess essentially your creditworthiness and everything like that. That process usually takes no more than 2 business days. There may be a couple follow-up questions here and there, but so far for the customers who've gone through the process, it's been really quick and easy. And then it only takes us about 5 minutes to set it up in the application.
All right, Nate, so you mentioned underwriting. This is something that a lot of business owners haven't had to deal with before. Why don't we just kind of take a step back and why does it exist and what should merchants expect?
Yeah, so there are points in the process where when you're collecting payments, our partner bank is exposed for usually a short period of time where they're taking on some of the risk. And so they do need to go through a quick underwriting process just to understand how the business is operating, its cash flows, some of those basic things, just to make sure that just like you would if you were receiving a loan, that you're credit worthy and everything like that. In this case, the businesses in this industry are established. They've been around usually for a really long time. And so there's not a lot of credit risk in this case. And so we found that the underwriting process is very quick. And as I mentioned before, we will help to streamline that as much as possible with a lot of the data that we already have sitting in the system.
All right, Tofiq, I'm going to throw a question to you. It's everybody's favorite question, pricing and surcharging. So we built in surcharging, the ability to pass credit card fees to the customer. How does that work? And is there any complexity around it and what can be done about it? Or what can't you do to it?
This is all part of the solution. One of the challenges that we uncovered talking to a lot of customers is that the lack of ability to forward the expense, the processing fee expense to the end user. And that's what surcharge is. It's really just forwarding that expense over. Now that's completely optional if the integrator who wants to use the Q360 payments, if they want to forward it or not forward it, they're able to make that selection as part of it. And it's very transparent. So when the end user, the cardholder, is processing that payment, they're able to see the surcharge that is actually being charged to their card as part of the processing. And that was a really big frustration point is that the integrators were already kind of squeezed in terms of the margins of jobs and other things. They're getting hit by these additional expenses associated with their credit card collection. And it's starting to become norm that a lot of people wants to pay with credit cards, especially for recurrings and small jobs like T&M service and many other things. So that was the idea around it, is to embed the surcharge recoup capability directly into the processing. Of course, managing all the compliance that surround that in various states and countries.
Excellent. So we've zoomed in, we've talked about the product, we've talked about how we got here, we talked about the benefits. Why don't we zoom out and talk about kind of the bigger picture? And I'll throw this one to you, Nate. Payments is the first financial services we're embedding in Q360. Where does this go from here? What's the vision for financial services inside the platform?
Yeah, it's interesting. You see a lot of change happening in the financial service industry, and much of these services are starting to become more and more industry specific. And what we're finding is that when you price horizontally across a bunch of different industry verticals, often pricing has to cover sort of like one size fits all pricing, where the more you know about a business and an industry, the better you can serve it with financial products. And so we certainly plan to continue to add additional financial products as one of the only industry focused companies that are serving this industry from a software perspective. And so this product that we've talked about, which powers collections in an embedded way, is the first product that we're building, but we expect to follow with a number of additional financial services products. That will be things like having payroll embedded in the platform as well, which Tofiq and I have found is another significant cause for manual work and reconciliation. Over time, we'll also be adding things like insurance, working capital, or equipment loans, all these sorts of things where we think integrators are underserved by generalist financial services institutions that don't understand the industry.
Excellent. Well, before we cut you guys off, is there anything else you guys would like to discuss about Q360 payments that we haven't already covered?
Well, I think over the many years of me working with Q360 and implementing Q360 at various clients, this has always been one of those pain points, right? And at one point the technology wasn't ready, and at one point we weren't ready. So now, trying to having this brought to the market to our customer base, this is going to be a really good value add for our customers, and I'm really looking forward to them starting to use this.
Yeah, we're really excited about what this means, particularly for our finance and accounting users. Anytime we can take a day or two out of the process of month-end close, we're really excited. And as we've talked about, there are a bunch of other benefits, things like speeding up the collection process. We think this is going to be a really meaningful expansion of the Q360 platform that's going to help in a big way.
Excellent. Well, if you're an existing Q360 user and you want to get in touch with us to find out how we can implement Q360 payments, get in touch with your customer success manager. And if you're a new to Q360, haven't heard about us or want to learn anything about our platform, just find us on www.solutions360.com. Lots of info for you there, and you can get in contact with us on our contact us page. Thank you both for being here today. I'm sure we've just scratched the surface on Q360 payments. Looking forward to learning more about it.
Thanks, Mac. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.